They told me I was disposable. They said my sister, Isabel, was their investment, their future, and that my meticulously saved college fund was merely a distraction. So on my 18th birthday, they cashed me out and threw me out. 5 years later, I sat across from the woman they sacrificed everything for. And I held her entire future in the palm of my hand. I still remember the feeling of the cheap, sticky vinyl of the dining room chair pressing against the back of my knees. It was June 4th, my 18th birthday, and the summer sun was bleeding through the plantation shutters, casting thin, judgmental stripes across the pristine beige carpet. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, sat opposite me at the mahogany table, the same table where I had spent years studying late, earning the grades they had once bragged about. Now the air was cold, sterile, and formal, a stark contrast to the usual birthday chaos I had expected. My sister, Isabel, was absent naturally. At 16, she was already safely ensconced in the role of the family's golden child, the designated genius whose delicate artistic temperament required total financial and emotional shielding. My future, the one I had planned meticulously since middle school, attending a top-tier engineering program at MIT, possibly Stanford, was based on my own tireless work ethic, merit-based scholarships, and the substantial college savings fund my parents had established and promised to match. A fund that, I calculated, was sitting at a respectable $80,000. Amelia, my father began, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he reserved for Isabel. We need to talk about priorities. I frowned, tracing the grain of the wood. About my deposits? I've already sent the acceptance letters. I just need to finalize the summer course payments. I'm ready. My mother sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound that I knew meant bad news for me. Your plans are admirable, but they are also flexible. Isabel's, on the other hand, are not. The Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris is accepting her in September. It is a one-time opportunity, Amelia. A destiny. But the tuition alone is astronomical, even before factoring in the studio rent and living expenses in France. I said, confusion creeping into my voice. We talked about this. She has her own scholarship, doesn't she? A partial one. Father cut in, pushing a single, folded sheet of paper across the table. And the school requires a full lump sum payment for the first year, plus a substantial security deposit, immediately. A matter of days. My eyes dropped to the paper. It wasn't a celebratory card, or a final financial breakdown. It was a recent bank statement for the Amelia Rose Educational Trust Fund. My hands felt instantly cold. The balance at the bottom was not the expected $80,000. It was $0. I looked up, trying to find a flicker of shame or regret in their faces. There was none. Only weary resignation. The air of people who had just made a very difficult, very necessary executive decision. You see, Amelia, my mother explained, her tone saccharine and condescending. You are resilient. You are a hard worker. You are smart enough to find your own way, to earn your own degree, maybe online, maybe part-time. Isabel, she needs the structure of an elite education. She needs this cushion. If we force her to compromise, her genius could be stifled. You, my dear, can thrive anywhere. The insult was not the theft. It was the backhanded compliment, the total lack of belief that my future held any intrinsic value compared to Isabel's fragile, overhyped potential. I wasn't their daughter. I was their emergency savings account, and they had just made a major withdrawal. They believed I was capable of overcoming adversity, which, in their twisted logic, meant I was the one who deserved the adversity. You drained 5 years of my life, my savings, everything I was promised. I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I have nothing. My father reached into his pocket and placed a white envelope on the table beside the voided statement. $500. That should cover first and last month's rent on a shared room, or a deposit on a very old car. You are 18 now, Amelia. Legally an adult. You have 2 hours to pack one suitcase. The money is needed to start Isabel's wire transfer by morning, and we cannot have distractions. The shock was absolute. Then it curdled into a cold, diamond-hard rage. I stood up, pushing the chair back so violently it scraped across the wood. I didn't cry. Crying was weakness, and they didn't deserve a single tear. I looked from my father's impassive face to my mother's pitying smirk. "You won't hear from me again," I said, my voice shockingly steady. "You think you're securing a future? You've just created a debt. And I promise you, I will collect. Not money, but interest." I took the $500, I needed every cent of their cursed charity, and walked upstairs. I packed only the essentials, my laptop, a small stack of clothes, and every textbook I owned. Within an hour and a half, I was in my beat-up Honda Civic, driving away from the house that was no longer a home, with the sole purpose of my existence narrowed down to a single, burning mantra: survive, succeed, revenge. The first year was a blur of fluorescent lights, stale coffee, and the constant, gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. The $500 lasted less than 2 weeks for gas and emergency necessities. I spent the next 3 months living out of my Civic in the back of a 24-hour supermarket parking lot. I took on any work I could get. Graveyard stocking at a Walmart, 2 shifts waiting tables, and cleaning offices late at night. The humiliation was relentless. I washed up in gas station bathrooms and ate instant noodles and day-old bakery goods. But every ache, every moment of despair, I channeled into fuel. They thought I was disposable. They thought Isabel deserved the easy path. I will prove them wrong. My plan to attend a top university was dead, but my desire to learn wasn't. I discovered online, accredited degree programs specializing in quantitative data analysis and cybersecurity, fields where skill and certification mattered more than the prestige of the campus. I used every spare minute, every dollar of my meager earnings, to buy course materials and pay registration fees. During my breaks, while other workers scrolled on their phones, I was coding, solving complex probability problems, and building my own projects. I was forced to be efficient. There was no room for error or delay. My life was structured around the relentless, exhausting pursuit of competence. My contact with my family? 0. I changed my number. When a random email from my mother, full of passive-aggressive pity and updates on Isabel's inspirational life in Paris, found its way to an old account, I deleted it and blocked the address. They were dead to me. The only thing they still owed me was the satisfaction of seeing their gilded plan fail. By year 2, I was working as a junior data entry clerk for a small logistics firm, a job I secured because I already knew Python and SQL better than the recent graduates they had hired. By year 3, I had completed my degree, paid off my small student loans, and was promoted to a full-time analyst position. I started dressing for the job I wanted, not the job I had. My clothes were not expensive, but they were sharp, clean, and commanded respect. The messy, frantic girl was replaced by a woman whose composure was as flawless as her data models. The real breakthrough came at 23. I was headhunted by Nexus Corporation, a major player in fintech, notorious for its demanding environment and massive compensation packages. They weren't interested in my humble online degree. They were interested in the complexity of the projects I had delivered and the efficiency I brought to the table. I moved to the city, bought a beautiful, minimalist apartment overlooking the skyline, a view I savored every morning, a constant reminder of how high I had climbed from that car seat. I took the role of senior quantitative analyst, and within 6 months, was promoted again, this time overseeing a team that handled strategic hires. I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't just earning money. I was accruing power. Around this time, I started hearing whispers from old family friends who couldn't resist gossiping. Isabel's grand European adventure had imploded spectacularly. She had dropped out of the art school after 2 semesters, claiming it was too restrictive and lacking inspiration. She had spent the remaining tuition and living funds on a series of disastrous, independent projects in Lisbon, resulting in a mountain of debt, a broken lease and a hasty, humiliating return home. My parents, drained and in financial distress from bankrolling her delusion, were now heavily leveraged and desperately trying to rehabilitate her, trying to force her into a stable career. They had chosen the fragile, entitled path. I had chosen the steel, meritocratic one. And the world was about to show them the consequences of their choice. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 5 years and 53 weeks since I was kicked out. My office was a corner suite, a fortress of glass and cool, expensive steel, on the 45th floor of the Nexus Tower. I was reviewing the final pool of candidates for the open position of entry-level data administrator. It was a tedious, high-turnover role, repetitive data scrubbing and basic organizational tasks. Stable, yes, but intellectually draining and low-paying. The kind of job you took when you needed a reliable paycheck, not a career. I reached the 6th resume on the list. My breath caught, but my heart didn't race. It merely turned to ice. Isabel, family last name. The cover letter was verbose, filled with meaningless buzzwords about her creative capacity and her unique perspective on office dynamics. The resume was a catastrophe. The employment history section contained a giant, glaring, 5-year gap labeled only as independent study and creative endeavors. I didn't immediately call HR to pull her file. I didn't even need to. I had the power to block her application with a single email, claiming a conflict of interest or lack of qualifications. But that would be too quick, too merciful. It wouldn't satisfy the debt. The scheduled time for her interview was 3 p.m. I looked at the clock, 2:55 p.m. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit jacket, and allowed a thin, cold smile to cross my face. At precisely 3:01 p.m., my executive assistant, James, buzzed in. "Ms. Rose, your 3 o'clock Isabel is here." "Send her in, James," I said, my voice smooth, practiced, and utterly detached. I picked up a pen and positioned her resume squarely in the center of the vast, polished mahogany desk. The door opened and Isabel walked in. She looked tired. The light in my office, which was designed to make the successful look sharper, only emphasized the lines of stress around her eyes. She wore a cheap, polyester suit that looked ill-fitting and hurried. The confident, slightly arrogant tilt of her head was still there, a remnant of her golden child status, but it was brittle, easily shattered. She didn't recognize me immediately. 5 years, a meticulously styled wardrobe, and the kind of quiet authority that only power can buy had transformed me completely. I was no longer the frumpy, stress-ridden teenage girl she had left sleeping in a car. I was Amelia Rose, senior manager. "Please have a seat, Isabel," I said, using her first name in the calm, measured tone of a professional. She sat down, sinking into the expensive guest chair. "Thank you, miss." She paused, reading my nameplate. "Amelia Rose." Her eyes snapped up to mine. The realization was instant and total. It was like watching a sudden, violent electrical surge cross a circuit board. Her face went from polite nervousness to stark, gut-punching horror. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. I waited patiently, my expression professionally neutral. I let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. "Amelia?" She finally choked out. The name a plea, a shock, and an accusation all at once. "The name is Ms. Rose Isabel. Or if you get the job, it will be ma'am. But let's stick with Ms. Rose for the duration of this interview. We have a very tight schedule." I made a small, efficient checkmark on her resume, signaling that the pleasantries were over. "Let's focus on your qualifications for the data administrator role. My first question, which is critical, concerns the 5-year gap between the completion of your high school diploma and now. Your resume mentions independent study. Could you elaborate on that, please?" She floundered, desperately trying to regain her composure and pivot back to the narrative she had prepared. "Yes, well, it was a period of intense creative development. I attended a very prestigious art school in Paris, the Académie des Beaux-Arts, and then worked on several independent projects, establishing my portfolio." "The Académie des Beaux-Arts," I repeated, picking up my pen and tapping the barrel lightly against the desk. "Impressive. Yet, you only list 2 semesters of attendance before the gap begins. Why the early departure from such a prestigious program? Did the program not meet your needs, or did you not meet the program's standards?" The directness of the question, and the fact that I knew the truth, threw her completely off balance. She started weaving a pathetic lie about a philosophical disagreement with the faculty. I didn't interrupt. I just let her talk until her voice cracked with desperation. "I see," I said coolly when she finished. "So your primary focus for the last 5 years has been on abstract, theoretical, and subjective creation. This role, however, is about rigorous, objective data integrity. It requires a meticulous eye for detail, an ability to handle long, tedious processes without error, and frankly, a high tolerance for boredom. Can you give me a tangible example of a time when your creative endeavors required you to meet strict, quantitative deadlines? She stammered, offering up vague examples of art commissions that needed to be framed by Thursday. I shook my head, my eyes never leaving hers. Isabel, this job involves cleaning and standardizing 3,000 lines of legacy user data before the market opens every day. There is no room for creative interpretation. There is only right and wrong. Your resume, and your answers, suggest you possess none of the discipline required for this task. You seem to have used the last 5 years to avoid any kind of true, sustained corporate accountability. She leaned forward, finally dropping the facade of the professional candidate, and her voice became dangerously low. Amelia, don't do this. I know why I'm here. I know you know why I'm here. This is a good opportunity for me to get back on my feet. Our parents are struggling, you know? They are under a huge amount of financial pressure because of all the investment they made in my future, and I need to start contributing. This was it. The moment of culmination. The coldness I had cultivated for 5 years finally broke through, not as hysteria, but as a quiet, terrible certainty. I pushed her resume away, making sure it landed face down on the desk. I looked directly into her eyes, leaning in just slightly, ensuring my words wouldn't carry beyond the desk. Isabel, let me be perfectly clear. I am here as Ms. Rose, the senior manager of talent acquisition. You are here as a failed candidate, who wasted 5 years of investment, and who cannot even competently lie about it. I paused, letting the weight of my next statement sink in, delivering the emotional killing blow with the precision of a scalpel. You remember the $80,000, Isabel? The money they deemed disposable, because you were the superior investment? Because I was apparently strong enough to thrive on the street, and you were not? I remember every single cent. She gasped, her face draining of color. The entitlement was gone, replaced by pure, naked fear. I survived their choice, Isabel. I rebuilt my life from absolute zero and secured this seat, this view, this power, all on my own merit. They chose to bet everything on your supposed destiny. And that destiny failed not because of bad luck, but because you lacked the discipline and commitment to sustain it. You, Isabel, are a bad investment. I leaned back again, returning immediately to the cool, professional shell. The transformation was complete. To conclude the interview, based on your demonstrably poor attention to detail, lack of relevant, sustained work history, and inability to provide concrete evidence of the basic organizational skills required for the entry-level data administrator position, I am formally denying your application. Your failure to thrive has nothing to do with me. It is the direct result of the choices you and our parents made, and the financial and structural shelter they provided, which ultimately suffocated your growth. I stood up, the signal for the interview's end. I wish you luck in your future endeavors. James will escort you out. I did not offer my hand. She rose unsteadily, her beautiful, artistic hands shaking. She looked devastated, but the real defeat was not the rejection. It was the realization that I was the consequence of their actions, and I was now standing on the mountain they had tried to prevent me from climbing. Your future was my past, Isabel. I finished, my voice low and final, a professional obituary. And you wasted it. You will not parasite off of it again. I closed the door and sat back down, the massive city humming silently below my window. The adrenaline began to fade, but the sense of calm, of cold satisfaction, remained. The score was settled. The call came that evening, predictable and desperate. It was my mother. Amelia, I demand to know why you did this. You embarrassed Isabel. She's distraught. You're successful now, you're powerful. You could have easily given her that job. She needs a fresh start. Her voice was laced with the familiar blend of manipulation and guilt. I didn't let her finish. I cut her off with a decisive firmness that she had never heard from me before. A tone honed in corporate boardrooms. Eleanor, you need to understand 2 things. First, Isabel was objectively unqualified for the role. I run a company, not a charity. Hiring her would have damaged my reputation and the firm's performance. Second, You and father made a decision 5 years ago. You decided that my financial stability, my education, and my future were less important than her delicate genius. You made a choice to cast me out to ensure her success. There was silence on the line, a sudden panicked recognition of my unwavering logic. That choice was a bet, Eleanor. And you lost. Isabel's failure is not my problem. It is the natural consequence of your misguided favoritism. I am not angry anymore. I am indifferent. You both taught me a valuable lesson on my 18th birthday. Family is conditional, and I cannot depend on anyone but myself. I paid my debt to you by leaving, and now, I am collecting my interest by observing the fallout of your choices. I didn't wait for her next, inevitable plea for financial assistance or reconciliation. I pressed the end call button, and immediately blocked both their numbers. I went over to my window, looked out at the glittering grid of the city, and felt an immense, overwhelming peace. My journey from the parking lot to the 45th floor had been brutal, but every moment of suffering had been justified by the cold, beautiful truth of that afternoon. I was free. I was successful. And their sacrifice had been utterly and completely in vain. That was the only justice I ever needed.